welcome. I am going to need a moment because this is now only the second time in 2 years that I've actually faced people in a room, and then also had amazing partnership from all the people who couldn't be in the room today but are on Zoom. And it is game changing to get back to seeing people. And so welcome everybody, both in person and remotely. I'm really excited to be here today. I'm Diana Robbins. I'm the director of the AJ Drexel Autism Institute, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here today to the Autism Public Health Lecture. Many of you have seen this already. This is one of my favorite ways to start a presentation. This is an infographic that tells people who we are. The Autism Institute was the very first autism research institute or center that took a public health focus to answer questions about autism. And that means different things to different people. And in fact, we're in the midst of a revamp of our official mission statement. But the things that it most means to me is, number one, we're really interested in addressing population level questions, not only focusing on, say, individual clinical or educational outcomes. The second thing is that our work is deeply rooted in community partnerships, and there are quite a few community partnerships represented both in the in-person audience today and on the Zoom. And we wouldn't be able to do our work without these partnerships, and I'm so thankful to all of you for being here. And then the third thing that it means to me is that we're really excited about work that we are doing, research that we're doing that matters to people living with autism today. Many people have heard that there's a 20-year pipeline from scientific discovery to actually making a difference in people's lives. And we are slashing that and really focused on a lot of research questions that matter right now. And again, without all of the people who, they say it takes a village, but it really truly does take a village to do the kinds of research that we do. And our Autism Institute has 3 research programs. The Modifiable Risk Factors program focuses a lot on both risk and protective factors that impact not just the development of autism, but also the trajectory over the lifespan. The Early Detection and Intervention program focuses a lot on those very early years with the goal of identifying children as early as possible so that they can start these evidence-based interventions that you'll hear more about today. And the Life Course Outcomes program focuses on many different issues across the lifespan, but especially on transition age youth and approaching questions that will impact quality of life more than anything else. And I'm sure I'm leaving lots of things out from these research programs, but that's why I'll keep coming back to these lectures. We also have a policy and analytics center that looks both at big data and also at local policy that impacts our city, our Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and also beyond. So there are so many exciting things that I can tell you about that we'll save for another day, but that gives you kind of a nutshell about who we are and what we're doing. This is our 9th annual public health lecture. COVID slowed us just a little bit, and we're back on track with a March lecture each year. And I'm going to let somebody else do the introduction for today, so you'll hear about that in a moment. But since our last lecture, which was just over a year ago, I want to tell you about one exciting thing that we've been developing here at the Autism Institute. We've formed a leadership council, and let me tell you, doing this during COVID is no small feat. And I have to give a huge shout out to Sarah Nannery, who's standing outside this room right now, welcoming people in. Without her help, this wouldn't be happening. There are quite a few faces here in the room and hopefully more on Zoom that are part of our council. And what we really aim to do with this is have a diverse set of voices that includes all different kinds of stakeholders. We were aiming to include autistic adults, parents and family members, people who touch clinical, educational, policy, law. I'm sure I'm forgetting really important umbrellas, but lots and lots of different voices to focus on this important task of supporting two-way communication. So the two-way communication between the Institute and the community. So we look to our Leadership Council members to bring us the pressing issues that community members are facing today that would benefit from our research, and also to share out our exciting findings and help the rest of the world hear about the work that we're doing so that we can broaden the impact of our work. And so thank you so much to all of you who are on the Zoom and here in the room representing our council. And so without further ado, sorry, slide trouble. Last one. All right, without further ado, I would encourage everybody to stay in touch with us. If you want to hear about upcoming events or engage in some research or bring us an idea that you wish we were studying, here's how to do it. And I am now going to turn it over to Giacomo Vivanti, who is going to introduce our speaker today. Thank you, everyone.
Hello, everybody. It's great to see people in person. I'm so happy. It's a tremendous privilege to introduce my colleague and friend, Dr. Sally Rogers. Sally Rogers is a distinguished professor emerita of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at University of California, Davis Mind Institute, and a licensed clinical psychologist as well. And she's one of the most influential scholars in the field of autism, having shaped the way we think about autism in terms of diagnosis, intervention, development, and neuropsychology. She has created an intervention called the Early Start Denver model. The articles documenting the outcomes of that intervention, one of those articles was named one of the top 10 medical breakthrough by the Time magazine in 2012. She served as the president of the International Society for Autism Research. She is a fellow of the American Psychological Association and the Association for Psychological Sciences. She received many awards, including a career award from the American Psychological Association and the Lifetime Achievement Award from the International Society for Autism Research. She was part of the autism work group in the DSM-5 when they were establishing the criteria that we use to diagnose autism. And on top of all the amazing research and clinical work, just to give you an example, she has published more than 200 articles, chapters, and books. She ranks in the top 1% of most highly cited researchers. On top of that, she travels around the world to disseminate knowledge about evidence-based practices. And it's in the context of that traveling that we met back in 2006, when I was working as a clinician in a hospital in a small town in Italy. We invited her to a conference. She actually came, and we started a conversation there. And that conversation was a journey into the scientific and societal dimensions of autism and disabilities. It was such an interesting conversation that I couldn't just stop. So we talked. She invited me to come to visit the Mind Institute in California for a few days. I went. At least that's what I thought I understood. Now that I'm thinking about it 14 years ago, my English was so bad that probably she didn't really mean for me to go there, but I did. And I'm happy I did. I ended up staying there for 5 years, working under her mentorship. And she shaped really the way I think about autism and my career as a scientist, asking 3 questions on a regular basis. The first question was, every time I will start rambling like I'm doing now, just trying to think through ideas, she will stop me and ask me, what is your hypothesis? Turn that idea into a testable, empirically, scientifically testable prediction. So you're going to turn an idea into scientific knowledge. Second question, okay, now you have that knowledge. How is this knowledge going to help people? Turn that knowledge into action. And the third question was, okay, now I see that you are doing some intervention work, you're interacting with this child, but what are you teaching? What is the learning that is going on in that situation? And this thought stays with me, really extending beyond the intervention session situation, as a reminder that any human interaction that does not involve any learning or any teaching is a lost opportunity. So please join me in welcoming distinguished Professor Sally Rogers.
I am so happy to be with you today. And I'm delighted to be here to this wonderful institute that I have only heard of in this very important work. And I really thank you, Diana, thank you, Giacomo, for bringing me here and for giving me the opportunity to be with the faculty for the last 2 days. Faculty, the staff, people in the community. I've had a marvelous experience. And I am so impressed with what's going on at Drexel. It's like I want to come and work here or something. It's an amazing setting, and it's an amazing community around you. And the potential for connection is so palpable, and there's so much motivation on both sides. So it's a good place. It's a good place to work. I can see that. And I also appreciate having the challenge of creating a new talk. So Diane said, come and do this public health lecture or this, and I wrote back and said, I don't do that. That's not my orientation. She said, oh, you can figure out a way to work it in. Just come and talk. So I said yes, because I have friends here. And then, of course, I take this stuff very seriously. So I began a 2-month period of reading on public health and what it's all about, and public health and autism, and reading papers that are coming from this group, and trying to totally change my brain and develop a completely new talk from this public health perspective. And I'm so glad that I had the opportunity to do that, because the project I just finished was a public health project, and I didn't even know it until I did all this work. So I'm grateful to be here. And because the topic is public health and community and the long-term implications of autism, I want to be talking today about the long-term implications of having ASD in this country, and how providing higher quality intervention to young children at risk could change the current scenario of life in the US for too many adults with ASD. And what we can do in communities to improve quality and outreach to autistic people and their families, for young children and for all people in need of supports and services. And anything that I talk about today under the frame of autism, of course, can be applied to any disability, any neurodevelopmental disability in any age group. We treat autism as something extremely special, but it's a part of a bigger picture. And there are many more similarities than differences between autism and all other developmental trajectories. Okay, the work I'm doing and will be citing comes from decades of partnerships. I'm not a person who works alone. I am a person who needs a team, loves a team, and always wants to be functioning in a team. And key people in the work I'm going to be talking about today are Jerry Dawson and Aben Stamer, who's been here with you. Giacomo has figured very strongly in my research, and Lori Viz in our research. Lori Vizmara, Kathy Lord, and Estes, and that is paired with me on all the RCTs we've done. And I could go on and on and on. The children and families are my teachers, and the team members that I've worked with, we've all been learners in the same kind of classroom that the families have shared with us, which are their lives and their children. So everything I'm representing is the work of many, many people over decades of work. So, you know, it should be a great day for autism in America, for autistic people and their families. As a nation, we spend so much money on autism. We talk about autism so much. We provide education and advocacy. We're providing $294 million in autism research last year. We provided, got something in the way of my screens here, $175 billion on autism services last year in this country. I've got another one in there, I thought. We spend $3 billion on special education just in the state of California, and the majority of that money supports students with autism. So it should be a great day. Why isn't it? For all this money, science, laws, work, education, services, what are the outcomes of adults with autism? The public health outcomes. Their health is poorer than most other comparison groups. They are dependent way too often on people for things they could have learned to do themselves if we provided the supports they needed when they were ready for those supports. They have mental health problems that make their lives much more difficult at a much higher frequency than most other people or incidents. Their incomes are lower than they are for anyone else matched with their language and educational groups. Their educations are poorer compared to their abilities, interests, and language than other groups. And they have less work of any kind, meaningful work, volunteer work, any kind of work. The outcome picture is a sad one. And what is the typical experience of autistic adults today? Very recent papers coming from Kathy Lord's 2-decade longitudinal study of people growing up with autism from the age of 2 into 26 at her latest point of assessment, have done an extraordinary job revealing the outcomes of our laws, our funds, our services and supports for these young people who are just in their late 20s now. So they were born, this started in the 90s, 20 years after the public laws were passed. These are all people who were in special education from the beginning. Most of them grew up in North Carolina, where there's Project Teach and resources. This project followed more than 200 people with autism and their families, starting at age 2 and seeing them at 2, 5, 9, 14, 19, and 25. And it's not just your typical clinical diagnosis of ADOS and IQ measures and Vineland's, what anybody can do. Extensive interviewing with the people, with their families, the people who work with them, all kinds of measures of quality of life, of mood, of happiness scales, trying to get as rich and full a picture of their lives as they possibly could. Let's see. And the analysis has gone on for years, but the last set of papers that they published in the last 2 years based on this adult outcome have been worked on by one of, I think, our world's leading statisticians in this kind of work, Andrew Pickles in the UK. And what I'm going to talk with you about today is work that he did based on a cluster analysis, which was looking at outcomes and creating the outcome groups from a statistical analysis of the 126 people that she had a full data set on at the time that they conducted this study. So this paper is Defining Positive Outcomes in More or Less Cognitively Able Autistic People by James McCauley and colleagues. And they clustered their, okay, well, that didn't work right. Okay, they clustered their cluster, they thought about clusters in terms of first, a cognitive cut, adults who were with IQs above 70 and adults with IQs below 70, because outcomes are different in those groups, and that's a main predictor of what kinds of outcomes people are going to have. And then as they looked at their data, I'm grateful that the data titles aren't called IQ, language, and levels of independent living. They're talking about more general adult outcomes, ones we could all relate to, like autonomy. How much control do you have over your life? Relationships, not just family relationships, but peer relationships and community relationships, and purpose. How meaningful are the activities that you spend your day on? For the adult group that had IQs below 70, 50% of them had, only less than 50% of them were independent, even in self-care and chores in supervised living situations. Only 51% of this group had social contacts outside of their family. 19% were employed, and 12% had regular volunteer positions. So that's about 30% had meaningful work activities to go to at least sometime during the week. For the adults with IQs above 70, 38% were living independently and not at home, not in an apartment, in the house. 53% had one friend or more, only 53%. And 20% had no friends and no peer social contacts on a regular basis. These are folks who have good language skills, have educational backgrounds. But 80% of them, here's the bright spot in this group, the 80% of them have regular work or are involved in ongoing educational activities. I guess we know how to do that a little bit better than we know how to do the other aspects of life for folks in this range. So this is not what we'd like to hear. And one of the big questions in these studies is, can we predict what the possibility of life outcomes are going to be for adults? What is it? Is there anything in early childhood that we could tune into? And they did find, first of all, early verbal skills, really early, like age 3, verbal skills and IQ was one of the best predictors, not only to age 9, but all the way through life. Age 3, language and IQ. Interestingly, severity of autism, which we pay so much attention to, never predicted anything about outcomes. Not from childhood into adulthood, not even in the later childhood years. So you also discovered the barriers to having a richer life within the group that you fell in. And they were the first people, I think, to report this, that SES, ethnicity, mental health problems, and current autism severity were prognostic of poorer outcomes in adulthood. Not early severity, but current severity. In two other papers that this group published, they looked at language and, again, these groupings. And they found some very important things about language. I already told you language was an important predictor of IQ and language and outcomes in adulthood. But there are 3 really important points from their language analysis that I've not seen anybody talk about before. And I think it speaks to all of us in early intervention. The first one is the important aspect about language that predicted forward from age 3 on was not the number of words you had, was not the number of nouns you had. It was 2 things: your verb use, the number of verbs you had, and the length of your sentence, their MLU, mean length of utterance at age 3. The second aspect of it was the structural language quality, the way that you're putting sentences together, grammar, spoken language in the way that we're constructing grammatical sentences, and verbs rather than nouns, or the pragmatics, the social use of communication, which we spend so much time on. Trying to teach people with autism, teach autistic children how to use a language in socially communicative ways. This was not predictive of outcomes. It's the complexity of syntax that was predictive all the way from age 3 to age 25. And third, the point that they're making from the data is that language is most malleable under the age of 6. The findings that they had been are replicating findings that have been carried on for 20 years by Pat Howland and the group in Britain who've been doing these similar kinds of studies. And all of the results that Kathy found in this study had been previously found in other studies that were not nearly as detailed. But this was not the first finding. For years, Pat Howland has been talking about how little improvement there's been in social skills or IQ across the spectrum. how many language impairments remain, both functional and social, and how few people are employed as adults across years and years of studies, including a very large systematic lit review that they talked about, with over 50% of their population, 2,000 people in the last review that they did, 2,000 people covering 25 studies in about 15 years. 50% needed support for every activity in their life, and 50% had few relationships outside the family as adults. They also found that childhood IQ predicts adult IQ, communication, and social outcomes, and that early language predicts social and adaptive skills. And ASD severity early on is not predictive of outcomes. So these are scary. I don't want to read this. This makes me so sad. I can't believe it. I've been working in this field all these years that these lives are covering, and I feel like there's not much to show for it yet. However, buried in this, there's some really good news for us. And I think the good news is right here, that cognitive development and verbal language development are the most important targets for early intervention to improve outcomes all the way through adulthood and to decrease disability. And these are not things we've been targeting lately. You know, we're kind of hung up in joint attention and social communication and, you know, vocabulary building, nouns, et cetera, et cetera. These are serious data. And I want to talk for a minute about what IQ is, because we think, you know, what's an IQ test? Why is this so important? Isn't IQ a genetic thing? I mean, how do we have any control over it? I was taught long ago by my mentor, Henry Leland, to think about IQ as it's just a measure right now of your rate of learning compared to your peers. It's a current measure. And it's just telling you how much you've learned in the years you've been alive compared to how much your peers have been alive. And it can be changed. So it's a rate of learning at this moment in time. There's nothing inherently fixed about that. Learning has to do with learning opportunities. And Henry used to say, look at a child and tell me how far away they are. This is in the 1970s, from middle-class American culture. And I'll tell you what their scores are like, because the tests measure your access to the common knowledge of the main group, the majority group in a culture. And so I think of IQ as a very flexible thing. I mean, I think that's all that this is marking. It's not marking something biological. We're going to come back to that point in a minute. We can change this. And fortunately, we have the tools that Diana has been working on and people like her all these years to help us identify autism during the period when the brain is most malleable and language is the most available to learn. We all know about the plasticity of baby brains. We all know that the newborn brain with its growing neurons and very few connections, and the 6-year-old brain with this massive amount of connectivity, and the 14-year-old brain, which is a cleaned out and cleaned up version of this. And we know what gets cleaned out. Now, when you clean out your closet, what do you get rid of? The clothes you don't wear. When pruning happens, what do you get rid of? The connections that you're not using. And so this is saying that we need language developing in these core infant and toddler skills developed in this period where there's massive amounts of connectivity. That's why we need to capitalize on that, because things that are meant to be developed in early childhood, if these potential networks aren't being used, we're going to lose those capacities later. Not totally, but we certainly don't have the fast learning ability that we do early on. But the young autism brain, we don't know that it has any huge specific problems that would get in the way of learning like this. What is it about early autism that results in developmental delays in most developmental domains in virtually every young child who's diagnosed with autism or 2 or 3? I've never seen a young child with autism who did not have significant developmental delays in more than one area. What is it about them? Okay, now let's move. Please forward.
Make sure you put, that worked.
Okay, that worked. All right. So a useful way to think about this is the social biopsychosocial model of autism spectrum difficulties that was first offered by Peter Monday and Jerry Dawson, working independently at about the same time towards the end of the 80s. And this model of social attention or social motivation, it's called different things, goes like this, that inside the biology of autism is a difficulty, a reduced amount of orienting to social stimuli. It's just the nature of what biological contributions to brain development is, that there is less attention to social stimuli than there is for most children. And this reduced attention to social stimuli results in decreased learning opportunities, because while early on in the first 6 months of life or so, when your baby's a lap baby, adults are initiating a lot of interaction with babies and they're in a responsive mode. By the time they're 3 to 4 months and they can send that social smile and they can send those vocalizations, they're initiating with us. And babies who are tracking and interested in the social world and really love that back and forth and want it to happen, social intention like that so overrides any other interest of most babies that they're initiating. By the time they're 6 to 9 months, 80% of their interactions are initiated by the baby. So we have a little child now with autism who has not so much interest in the social world, and they're very interested in the object world. We don't know if those two things go together, if they're dependent, but they're not initiating. And parents are seeing a baby who's happily playing and interested in the world, and it's like, that baby's fine, they're happy with me. Parents try to initiate, and they don't get a whole lot back from the baby, and they correctly interpret that as, what I'm doing isn't very interesting. I'm going to follow the baby's lead. The parents don't differ from other children. There's a widespread, I think, myth about parenting. There is no difference we've ever found between how parents of autism parent their children, and parents of typically developing children parent their children. The difference is in the child response. But the child response is a critical feedback loop to the parent about what to do and what not to do. And so I'll show you a video in a minute that shows you this in action. But parents, when a child isn't reinforcing your efforts and telling you you're on the right track, I love this, do it some more, parents are like, he must not like this. He's turning away. I don't know what, he doesn't like this. I got to figure out something else. Or I'm going to let him play with the toy that he wants to play with because she loves that. She's happy, she's cheerful, etc. So because of this change in social interaction, this is really decreasing the amount of back and forth. And there are all the learning opportunities that a toddler needs to develop cognition, social interaction, communication. They're in back and forth. We don't learn to talk with our toys. We learn to talk with our people. We don't learn to play games and share and do all the things that we do in the social world when we're playing by ourselves. Toddlers are immersed in a social world. And toddlers with autism who are not in that world are not getting the learning opportunities that they need to build those connections. But they're not doing nothing, they're doing other things. And so their connectivity is building around a different set of activities and a different set of skills than the toddler who does not have autism and who is in the middle and taking it all in and keeping it all going. So over time, these decreased learning opportunities are resulting in decreased learning, which is causing a drop in their developmental rates. These babies are usually at kind of typical rates at 6 months. And if you look at the data from Sally Usnov and other studies, you watch these DQs, which is a baby version of an IQ, dropping. So that by 2 years, a baby who had a DQ of 90, 100, 110, these DQs are down here when I get them into my studies at 50s and 60s. There's this massive decrease in learning rate. That's what that means. And it keeps going on. But so not only is the baby not learning that content, but other things are coming into place. And this process is sculpting a brain. I showed you that sculpting in that slide, that's thinking about different things, interested in different things, and operating on different information, because there's a whole different set of connectivities that bring pleasure, skills that have been developed, interests that have been developed. So one reason that we are dealing with low cognitive performance in adults is this process that's going on in early childhood. Is this a necessary part of things? It is not. Lovaas's 1987 paper, which was so scorned by so many of the scientists in this country at the time, showed for the first time that this decrease in developmental quotient, these children had an average DQ in the 50s when he started at age 2 to 3, that his treated group demonstrated this massive gain in developmental quotient across about 5 years of 40 hours a week of treatment, compared to the other group of children who came to him who got a little bit of DTT and a little bit of help for their parents. I was a young professional running a preschool for children with autism when this paper came out. So I'm trying to do this work, right? And I'm watching IQs. I'm just trying to get developmental quotients up to like a month per month. And then I saw this and it's like, oh, this is what's possible. I said, well, this is what I have to learn how to do. And everybody, you're reading the commentaries on the paper. It's like, there's a problem with the science, there's a problem with this, it's over selection of, data, suppression of data, whatever. But I was just young and I had a beginner's mind. We talked about that last night. And so it's like, okay, if this is possible, I'm going to learn how to do it. So is it possible? I'm going to share with you 4 different, very well-controlled studies. 3 of them are RCTs that demonstrate that it is. This is Tris Smith's 2000 randomized controlled trial using Lovaas's method in a very tight methodological design. He demonstrated in 30 hours a week over 3 to 5 years with a group of 28 children randomized into treatment and no treatment, that they had to gain this level of gain, which is about 10 to 12 point IQ gain compared to the controls who were losing more ground. So there is a significant IQ gain based in early intervention in that method. And now I went the wrong way. Paper that Jerry Dawson and I published in 2010. This is about 20 hours a week of one-on-one for a 2-year period of time with 2-year-olds who started, they were younger, so their DQs were a little bit higher, but still in the 50s. And we showed, again, this very fast increase in DQ over 2 years compared to children who are in community services getting a lot of intervention. It's interesting to me how similar these slopes are. In addition, this is Giacomo Vivanti's work in group data, very well matched groups in Australia, an N of 57 across 2 groups, one getting the best of Australian government's early intervention for autism, and this one getting a group version of Early Start Denver model. Here the slopes again are very similar. This is 1 year of data in a ratio of about 1 to 4, 1 to 5 teachers to 1 for 15 hours in a group, 1 year of time in a preschool setting. Here you've got the same amount of IQ gain that Tris Smith published with children who are just about as old. And here is Amy Weatherby's data. This is a parent-mediated intervention. It took place over 9 months. There are 82 children randomized to either a group parent learning of her ESI method or a parent delivered one-on-one 3 hours a week, 2 to 3 hours a week of coaching. And there again, in 9 months is a significant IQ gain in these children who are only 16 months old at the start of intervention. Notice how the younger they are, the higher their DQs are in these studies. That kind of fits with what I was telling you. But and how rapidly these children are responding. What does it mean to raise IQ? It means there's so many learning opportunities that have occurred that their learning rate is rising up and they're getting much closer to their peers. Okay, so yes, we can, no matter what the Brits say, we can significantly increase IQ in the first 2 to 3 years of life for young children with autism by doing a variety of different kind of high quality interventions. What about language? Yeah, what about language? Can we accelerate language? Whoops, am I going backwards? Of course I am. Okay, sorry. It's the same story. Here's the original Tris-Smith RCT showing the language of that group increasing quite nicely, about a half standard deviation. And the control group, this is not a regression, right? This is a slowing of learning because learning opportunities are dropped off. So when you see a downward line like that, don't think regression. Just think their learning slowing down. They're losing more and more opportunities every year, and the other kids are getting more and more. This is Jerry Dawson's in my, these are all structural language measurement. Here is Giacomo's group in Australia. Look at the language trajectories in those children. 1 to 4 group, 15 hours a week for 12 months. And here is Amy Weatherby's group, 2 to 3 hours a week of intervention through parents for 9 months compared to a group ESDM learning model for the parents. So can we increase structural language? Absolutely, we can increase structural language using a variety of high quality approaches. So what are the common elements that these programs are using? They're so different in so many ways. They are all working from a comprehensive curriculum approach, and they are using a generalist model. And I'll come back later to talk about what a generalist model of intervention is. They're all focusing intensively on verbal language. Doesn't mean they're ignoring social communication or joint attention, but it doesn't replace the focus on verbal language. And not any of these are really using other devices. There's not a lot of AAC or PECs going on, certainly not in Trith's study. I don't think Amy was using any of those for most of the children. We don't use them in ESDM until there's a period of time in which we think they need them. So these are children who are mostly getting a verbal approach to language, but some of them a developmental approach. Everyone's staff is trained to fidelity, and fidelity is monitored. We'll come back to that point. That means they are teaching very carefully and precisely according to a standard, and that's checked. And finally, all of these interventions are delivering a very high frequency of learning opportunities. What percent of children living in our communities now, your community now, are getting this kind of high quality intervention in the first 3 or 4 years of life? I know in my community, I would say none, almost none. They're not getting this. And yet, we have these models available. They're in the public domain. There are a couple of important studies that talk about how much community EI results drag behind what we know is possible and replicable. I did the calculations. It's like half the points. If you look at the community work that Alison Nemias published in 2019 when she compared high quality intervention to community interventions from a large community study, she found that both in language and in IQ, I calculated it myself while I was prepping the talk, there's less than half the gain in the community group that there were in children in community groups who are using high quality interventions compared to community groups who are using their typical eclectic approach. Less than half the gain in IQ points or language points. And she also found, this is really scary to me, that the duration of intervention, the longer the kids were in community intervention, the poorer their outcomes were. That's frightening. Why? Why is this happening? Well, Connie Kazri and Tris-Smith wrote this line the other in a 2016 publication. Most interventions applied to children with ASD in America and in the world have never been tested. They're not using the tested, tried and true models. It's not about the hours. We say, well, they're not getting the hours, but it's not about hours. I just published a study that looks at the change in developmental quotient for children getting 12 hours versus 24 hours a week of one-on-one treatment for a full year. There's the difference. There's no difference. There's no difference in the amount of gain these children made on any measure we could find, based on basically double the intervention hours. So why are we spending 40 hours a week when we could be maybe providing 15 hours a week for 3 children instead of 45 hours a week for 1 child? Oh, the money could be serving more children if we weren't so focused on these astronomical amount of hours, which are not appropriate for any young child or any school-age child. Who would put a school-age child in a classroom for 40 hours a week? We wouldn't do that with a 10-year-old. I mean, we do it for our work and we suffer, right? This is not normal human behavior to be working this long. This is based on an RCT that we did where we were randomizing 89 children to either 12 or 22 hours a week for 1 year of treatment. This is 1-year data. And it's also not about the way they're being taught, because we compared ESDM and very, very well done DTT, which John McCacken himself was supervising, face-to-face supervision through the whole project. Here's the data. The dark blue is the ESDM progress. The light blue are the John McCacken's kids across 3 different sites, 89 children. No difference. When you control for hours and you control, it's all one-on-one, this amount is the same. It's not about what kind of teaching you're doing. Yeah, so what is it? Let's look at the differences between high quality models and community models. First of all, high quality models tend to use a manualized and comprehensive approach. Community practices tend to be eclectic. I'm thinking about Part C right now. I'm not talking about private schools that are offering a particular model. I'm thinking about what I see when I go into the community and look at community preschools. I see an eclectic mix of everything, covering different developmental domains, but no particular theme running through anybody's interventions. High quality models use a set curriculum and they're data driven. Community practices that I'm aware of focus on IEP goals. They're not very data driven, they're not very measurable, and there are not very many of them. The high quality models use a generalist model. The community practices I'm aware of tend to use a specialist model. We'll talk more about that in a minute and why I think that's so problematic. The high quality models, as I said, use an intensive focus on development of verbal language. Community practices, it's really eclectic what is going on for language of those children. They come in and they might hit a visual schedule, or they might get PECs, or they might get an AEC. Even if they're talking, they tend to get other systems. It's amazing to me. There is no like philosophy in the programs I see about how language develops or how we're going to do this, you know, and there's this myth that young children understand pictures. Young children don't understand pictures. Picture knowledge doesn't come about to age 3 to 4. When we see responses to pictures, we've just trained the association. They don't know that this represents a life thing, but we lean on pictures because we think children with autism can learn pictures. Fidelity of practice in the high quality models, there's an unspecified level of fidelity in community. The term fidelity of practice isn't in the community centers I work with. And finally, high quality models look at the frequency of learning opportunities. They're built to deliver a rapid rate of learning opportunities. In preschools that I visit and Part C programs, I see the focus on the child participation, not the child learning. If the child's in the group, that's great. If the child's on the playground with others, that's great. They're not really parsing where's the learning going on. So I'm going to go through these things and think about, here's the challenge. With the people and the money we have today, what could be going on in our communities? The curricula are out there. This is Giacomo's curriculum for using ESDM in groups. It's published, it's available. Here's the parent model of the ESDM. It's published, it's available. It's a cookbook of how to do this, how to help parents do ESDM at home. But therapists love it because therapists use it in their ideas for getting ideas in the classroom or in their one-to-one treatment. Here's the treatment manual that John McCack and Ron Leaf have developed that we used in our EIBI or our DTT model that we just tested. It tells you what to do. These are this is a non-specific curriculum. This is Diane Bricker's beautiful AEP curriculum, which is developmentally sound for all kinds of young children, has good measures, has good activities. Here's the core Early Start Denver model curriculum. Here is one of Amy Weatherby's tools, the CSBS, and she has a number of different tools on her website and published that lay out her curriculum. So the curricula are there. What about learning objectives? The learning objectives drive the teaching, right? Because we're teaching to the objectives. Let's look at an IEP. I took this from the last child, the child I just started treating a couple weeks ago. She's 2.5. So her IEP objective written last summer was this is around safety. Parents will learn and implement some strategies to help her show an understanding of common dangers. Is that measurable? Is that clear? How would you coach parents to do that? Parents will look into using a backpack, a leash, or a wagon with a harness. Parents and EI provider will brainstorm ideas. That's not really an outcome, brainstorming for a year of school. All right, I'm going to put up an objective that we wrote for the same problem, safety behavior. So this one, the objective says during play activities, I can't read that one, it's too small. During play activities inside and outside, when adult and child are playing games, including movement of cars, trains, toy animals, walking together, holding hands, and on a swing or similar movement toy, child will respond correctly when the adult says stop and go. On the first instruction, 75% of opportunities. Okay, now the parent knows what to do and when to do it, right? But we go further than that. That's a 3-month objective. So from now until, I just wrote this March 15th, June 15th, that's where we want to be. But right now, this little girl responds to go about half the time in some activities. So there's our starting point. So now we sketch out 6 steps to get from where she is to where the goal is. And it'll probably take a week or 2 to teach each of those steps, but each one is a target that's getting closer and closer to the goal. And it's just teaching it a piece at a time, like a task analysis. Although it's kind of a different task analysis than a BA would probably do. But anyway, it's task analyzed and the parent understands, oh, right now I'm on step 2. All I'm trying to do is to teach her to go while we're holding hands. So we're going to play stop, go, stop, go. We're going to run, stop, go, 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 stop, go, 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 stop. That's the first game. And then it just builds from there. So it's just the way you wrote the objective. It's just in the writing of it. Same goal, but now we've got measurable skills that are generalizable across activities, across people, across locations, and it's a 3-month goal, not a 1-year goal. And it's absolutely clear what parents or the therapist should do. Thank you. Okay, the whole learning plan. Here's her IEP. She has 4 goals for the year. They're all written just like the one I wrote you. That's only 4 things that the team is going to be focusing on over an entire year of time. How are you going to increase learning rate when the children her age are learning hundreds and hundreds of things in that year? If all you're helping the parent do is target 4 things in a very indirect way. We write 10, for their children who are getting only parent implemented intervention, we write 10 objectives, each of them broken down to the steps you see every quarter, 10 to 12 every quarter. And inside those, there's not just one behavior, right? She's going to learn to do these things in multiple behavior, multiple settings, multiple people, multiple activities. So that becomes 4 times that, that's 50 or so objectives that are written with all the teaching steps laid out for a year. It's still not where you'd like to be, but at least it's doable for a family. And if she was in a classroom, she'd have 25, not 10 objectives. And our kids master 88% of those objectives over 10 years of studies, no matter how the intervention is being delivered. So you can teach a whole lot in a 2-hour session if you just make the plan to do it and take the time. And it's all coming from assessment data. We didn't do anything different. We didn't gather any different data than the classroom staff are gathering as their IEP. Okay, so there's the learning plan difference. Now let's talk about what generalist versus specialist programming means. Here's a specialist model. This is what I'm used to seeing in our Part C interventions in California. And you see a team of people who are required by the IFSP team, special ed, speech and language, early childhood ed, psychology often, OT, PT, the pediatrician's in there because the parent is asking them questions, a social worker might be there. And every person has a set of recommendations that they give to the family and they put in the IEP. There may be 4 or 5 things. It's not very specific. They each have their IEP goals. They're all feeding directly into the family. And very often when the family says to each one of them, but what do I do about her head banging? But what do I do about her head banging? Every person the parent asks will tell them something different because there's no general plan for head banging. Everyone has generated their own objectives. And if the speech and language person comes every 2 weeks for 45 minutes, then the language curriculum is delivered 45 minutes every 2 weeks. The OT comes once a month, that's when she gets that. Otherwise, nothing is happening because parents are not coached. They're supposed to be coached. That's the plan. That's what the law says. But what happens is that the adults feel the need to do the intervention because they're clinicians. And so the parents might watch from the side and then the adult says, well, do those things that I did. Try to do that, 3 times a day for the next month. I'll be back in a month and see you. I mean, that's how that goes. All right, what's a generalist plan look like? This is what a generalist plan looks like. Everybody on the team contributes their knowledge to one plan. Like the objectives I just showed you, that list of 12 covers every developmental domain. Everybody builds a plan, builds into the plan. It's one plan. It's written the way I just showed you. And whoever is working with the child that day is teaching from the same plan, all of the objectives. And the parent is being coached by the team lead who's in the middle, and the parent is being coached on the same plan. And everybody knows what step the child is on the plan because it's communicated weekly. So this child is getting the same content from every single person in her life every day. That really cleans up the learning. Now the child has a chance to actually experience something. This is the beauty of a generalist model. And when this is delivered for a quarter and then rewritten, you've got a lot of learning going on. 25 objectives for a child in a group program is 100 objectives in a year, covering all the domains and being watched and monitored by all these folks. Now, we typically don't have all these people interacting with the kids because it's a generalist model. Each person has learned all the techniques needed by the others. So I'm running the speech and language objectives, the cognitive objectives, the OT objectives, the fine motor objectives. I run them all because I know what to do, because I've learned them, because it's in the objective what to do, plus we can share with each other. So everybody's doing the same thing at fidelity, and the child's getting very, very clear learning opportunities from this. Okay, and so now, are we clear on generalist versus specialist? Because now I want to talk about what a learning opportunity is. The BCBAs in the room, don't know, this is the way I think. I'm not a BCBA. This is a developmentalist thinking about a learning opportunity. So I think about a learning opportunity as an interaction within which learning occurs. And what is learning? I think learning is the opportunity to carry out a goal-directed action that's followed by feedback that affects the child's future actions. So I did some cartoons for you about this. So here we have our good old antecedent behavior consequence chain. We all know the ABCs of learning, and there's a plus or minus at the consequence showing whether or not the consequence is experienced as a positive one for the child, achieving their goal, or a not positive one, not achieving their goal. Okay, and the antecedent leads to the behavior, stimulates the behavior stimulates the consequence is either positive or negative, and the meaning of that consequence valence feeds back to the tie between the antecedent and the behavior. A negative consequence is going to weaken the link between the antecedent and the behavior, like head banging when the telephone rings. A positive consequence is going to strengthen the tie between the antecedent and the behavior, make it more likely to happen again. Is that clear to everybody? Okay. But we can't just get behavior out of clean air, right? If the behavior is already there, sometimes you could maybe only need the A and the B and the C. But if the behaviors never occur and you're teaching a brand new skill, you got to do something to get the behavior. And so that's where a prompt comes in. And a prompt is a way to help the child start the new behavior, which isn't in their repertoire yet, after the A. So the antecedent occurs, we prompt the child as minimally as possible to get the behavior so we can develop the consequence, so we can start to strengthen that A-B chain. Okay, so in this yellow box is what I think of as a learning opportunity. An antecedent, which may be inside the child. You know, children often start their own behavior without an external stimulus. They see something, they go over, they want to do it. And so they do it. We're still there to provide a consequence, as is the material wherever else they're doing, and that still feeds back. But this works, don't always think of the A as an instruction or a model, because it's often a self-generated behavior that we want to shape up. Like my little granddaughter who's just gotten potty trained and is trying to figure out how to pull up her pants. And she wants to just grab the pants, the underwear, the sweats, and just pull them all up at once. And of course that doesn't work because they just come up in this lump. So she's got to learn how to separate them and use her fingers and pull them up. So she's got this behavior, but we got to clean it up. She initiates it, and then we prompt it into a more mature behavior. Okay, so there's a learning opportunity. And we have ways, we can count learning opportunities. One of my grad students, Katie DeVlandis, who's now a professional in the community, did this work on can we actually count learning opportunities in a reliable way? And we can, where our goal in the ESDM is to see a learning opportunity every 30 seconds. What we found is that a skilled teacher can deliver a learning opportunity every 10 seconds, and it looks completely natural. You would never think this is too much teaching or too intense. All right, so let's look at some learning opportunities, okay? This is a little boy, he's 2, and he is coming into a study. Let me make sure that I can get this video to play. Please, Bart, let this video play. Okay, it's playing, now we can't hear it. Can you hear that okay?
Yes.
Okay, all right, so we're gonna watch for learning opportunities here. And let's say when we see one. Mom just tried to do something, didn't she? She pointed to the pegs and she moved them around. He didn't do anything with it, so that's a failed learning opportunity. There was an antecedent, but there was no behavior, no consequence. Here's a learning opportunity. Dad's trying to get an imitation going with the shaker. The child just delivered a learning opportunity to the dad. By throwing that thing away, he delivered a negative consequence to dad's initiation. And the child was reinforced by doing that because he got rid of dad's intrusion into his favorite play. So child was rewarded by not playing, and dad was punished for trying to play. Okay, I guess that's the end of that.
It's frozen on Zoom.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
I have to go on.
Okay. All right. So do you see, can you see these? Okay. So now let's look at this same father and son. A month later, we started parent coaching with the mother, not the dad, because dad was at work and mom wanted to come in during the day. So the next video you're going to see, there have been 4 parent coaching sessions of an hour apiece to mother. And mother has gone home and shared with dad what she learned. And so this week, mom was sick. So dad came in. Okay, there's a learning opportunity. And he's speaking now. He wasn't speaking before. There's a second learning opportunity, getting him to open it, prompting him. There's the reward. The child's saying some words, letters actually.
Are we done already? All done? You want to change the block?
Child initiates and signs more for block.
Can you help me?
So father's going to put these things away, ask the child to help me. He did. All right, followed through. He's being reinforced because the toy he doesn't want is being taken away. And now he's going to get to play the new toy. So that was another learning opportunity. Blocks, he just said blocks. There's another learning opportunity.
Yes. There we go. Finger picture. What are those fingers? Oh. I think that's what it was. All 4. There we go. Good job.
Dad reinforced that. Good job.
And Daddy put oh, you want
It kind of says, I want green in there.
red?
But Dad didn't get it. So there's a choice.
Put a green one on.
No, he says no green.
Another red.
Child wants to pick his own colors. It's about the colors. And Dad doesn't quite know that.
Okay, yellow. They have to be all different colors like this.
Okay, now he took one from Dad.
Okay. Geez, okay.
And now we let Dad put one on. There's a turn.
Man, that's not a color. Put it back in. What color? Yellow block? Yellow? You have something in mind? You have blue in mind? Blue? Okay.
Blue, he just said blue.
Okay, Daddy's turn. The yellow. Okay.
Okay.
All tower.
And now turn taking is going just fine because he's reinforced by this tower.
Yellow.
See how interested he's getting in building this thing higher and higher. And now his whole behavior now has changed. Yeah, and he named that color green. Daddy repeated it.
All tower.
Okay, so we don't have to go on with this, but we can see more learning opportunities, right? In a very short period of time, and this child has started to speak, and you're hearing letters and you're hearing colors. So a lot of learning has happened. And this is all coming from a coach to a parent, to the other parent, to the child. And look at the amount of change in 4 weeks of time. A nonverbal child is now speaking. I'm not going to show you this video if we have time in the discussion. This is the therapist who is working at 1 every 10 seconds. And it seems like that's so intense. It's impossible, but it looks gorgeous. And it's not hard to do that, right, Giacomo? It's not hard to develop a learning opportunity every 10 seconds once you're really thinking in that way. All right, and I think the last topic I want to talk about is implementation fidelity. All right, this is another characteristic of high quality interventions. Implementation fidelity is the degree to which we're doing a procedure, a teaching procedure, the way it's meant to be done. And why is it so important? Well, here are 2 birthday cakes. And what happened that the one on the right is turned out so perfectly and one on the left is fallen apart so badly? What do you think is the difference here behind the scenes? Following the recipe precisely. because cakes are hard and you don't want to ad lib with cakes, especially if you're a beginner. This is what implementation fidelity is. Your best practice, whether it's any practice, is not going to be useful if it's not used the way it was tested and proven to be useful. And in some ways, the procedures manuals that we have, they're cookbooks. This is how to make ESDM lead to good outcomes. This is how to make DTT lead to good outcomes. We need to follow the recipes and do them the way they're meant to be. And implementation fidelity really affects outcomes. Here's a paper from Giacomo's lab. Ashley Zitter, published this paper a year ago. This is a really nicely done study, and it's the first of its kind. They looked at 30 minutes of video from therapists in their group, and they looked at the child's response to each of the learning opportunities that were in that 30 minutes. And they rated them as to whether the child was performing the way they wanted them to or not, the target. And what they found is that the degree of fidelity with which their trainee or their staff were using the model, this is ESDM, was strongly correlated with the speed with which the child learned the skill that was being taught. In 30 minutes, they could see this, the effect of implementation fidelity on child learning, just, in like 3 activities. There it is. So it really matters in terms of learning rate, because these are making all those learning opportunities so useful in terms of children moving quickly. These kids have big gaps. They need to learn quickly because we want to fill those gaps and get them up to their peers. And we've got to be able to teach quickly, and they've got to be able to learn quickly. And that we have in our hands the tools to do that. It's called fidelity. And their fidelity tools are everywhere. You don't need to buy a curriculum. This is the Early Childhood Technical Assistance Network. They have 30 or 40 different fidelity tools posted for anybody to use. This is their tool for naturalistic teaching. This isn't complicated. This is just rating 4 or 5 of the 7 of the characteristics involved in naturalistic teaching. People could use it themselves. You can use it with your peers. A peer group can gather and do this. A group of teachers would say, let's try this together in our classroom and see how we do and talk about it and learn to teach at fidelity in the way that they are planning to be teaching. There's another site, the National Professional Development Center website, has another 40 or so elaborately written teaching plans and fidelity measures. They're all out there for public school early intervention teachers to use. So fidelity doesn't require a grant. It doesn't require a trainer. It requires a tool and some motivation to learn it. Who needs to establish fidelity in a classroom? Everybody who's teaching, including parents. If we want children to learn as quickly as they're capable of, we need to be teaching in a high quality way so that they have the most opportunities to learn. And so this needs to be a team project. All right, we've been talking about a lot of things that high quality interventions do that could be done inside existing preschools right now. All the tools are here, all the books are here. The knowledge is within the team. It's a way of working differently. And it may seem like, oh, it's going to take so much time. Oh, it's going to cost so much money. How would we ever do this? How do we ever add more of these high quality elements? Well, as our colleague and brilliant friend David Mandel wrote recently, we can pay for high quality services early, or we can pay the consequences of not providing them for the lifetime of a person with ASD. And this is a cost analysis that they did on a paper on the original Jerry Dawson 2010 paper of Early Start Denver model. There's a similar cost analysis done by the Ontario, Canada group of their province-wide early intervention project. But I want to explain this to you a little bit if I can, because it's quite moving to me. What this shows is that, let's see, the ESDM group is in blue and the community services group is in black. And this is the amount of money being spent on a child's intervention inside that particular study. So the kids in the community started off costing less to the community agency than did the ESDM kids. And that was true through the first year of intervention. This is a 2-year project. And it was true until right about up to the end of the second year of intervention. But after that point, these children are 4 years old now. From that point on, the community is spending more money on the children who got community services than they are on the children who got ESDM. And with the idea here that this is just going to increase over time. And this was amazing to me. I always figured that we would capitalize on the cost of early intervention in adulthood, when adults were working and learning and contributing financially. Never in my wildest dreams did I think by age 4, we could start to see the financial payoff. But the payoff is this, that the kids in ESDM are getting fewer and fewer special services from age 4 on. They're moving into regular preschools, not specialized preschools. They're moving into regular classrooms, gen ed classrooms, not specialized classrooms, and they don't need one-on-one support. Not that I think anybody needs them, but that's a discussion for maybe a question. So anyway, from this point on, they're costing less and less money because they don't need special services and they're in the regular curriculum learning with their peers, which is where the most learning occurs. Meanwhile, the kids who got 16 hours a week of community services every year, they're falling farther and farther behind and they're needing more and more services, but they're not closing the gap. The gap is actually widening. So we have to think about this, and a school district ought to be able to see this because they're paying for services from age 3 to age 22. You know, the payoff for them is rapid. The cost savings is rapid. And I know cost savings is not a great way to think about this. These are human lives. But I mean, the quality of intervention comes first. That's what we're talking about. And putting the money here during the most important learning years rather than out here for the rest of life is what we do for typically developing children. We put the money early when they're young, when they're ready to go to school. All right, so last part of our talk is about building bridges. From science to community. How do we get the science that we're talking about into community? Fortunately, you have experts in this community on this kind of science, community implementation science. And David Mandel is one of the world experts in this. Giacomo is doing this kind of work. You've got people, this is a rich place to be doing and thinking this way. So I'm so glad Drexel is so motivated to deal in the community. And I just want to talk for a minute about what community implementation science is all about. It's talking about starting with an initial study, which is in a lab, usually. It doesn't have to be, it could be in the classroom. Hopefully we stop starting things in labs and we start in the community even from the beginning. And we're focused on individual children and individual children's progress. And if there's a positive result here, then we continue in this model for a while with replications, randomized control trials until we're sure that we really have something that is teachable, something that helps children. At that point, although this could have started in the community, it doesn't right now, then community implementation science kicks in. And now we go to community partners and we draw community partners into the idea of using this model here in our community. Like you could be doing right now in Philadelphia in any of these high quality models I've just been talking about. All the materials are available. And the community partners gather as a group. We'll talk about who they are in a minute because they represent a lot of different people with a lot of different investment in the product. And the community partnership adapts the model as needed for the people who live here and the resources who are here and the physical resources that are there. And the community partners disseminate this research plan widely and help community people join into the effort. And community people learn and practice the model, and community people test the adapted model on the whole group of children in that community. And this is what community implementation science is all about, is getting this initial work out here as soon as there are tools available, like manuals, like fidelity tools, like curriculum tools, like all the things that we have in those 6 manuals I just showed you that say this is ready to go. This is research with a community rather than on a community. And that's a critical difference. And it's going to make a critical difference in the maintenance of those skills in the community once the team has trained people and helped them learn to sustain it without continuing support from the university. But it's dependent on partnerships. And who are these community partners? They're autistic people, they're families members, they're school personnel, they're health representatives, they're social services representatives, and community leaders from whoever are the community leaders. It could be religious leaders, it could be political leaders. Depends on the community. We need special education involvement. We need finance involved so that we can figure out how we are going to use our resources differently and where the financial arms lead to. We need mental health involvement because we know the degree of mental health that's associated with autism, even in early years. We need the early intervention agencies to be involved in this. We need scientists to help with the designs and the carrying out. And we need administrators in all these different systems to be talking together about what works, what our community needs, what our parents need, what our staff are comfortable doing and like doing and want to do. The community adaptation process shouldn't be like fitting a square peg in a round hole, because we want to be working with what the community wants to do anyway. What are the values in this community? What are the practices in this community? How do parents teach children or think about teaching children in this community? The adaptation requires strong administration support. If there isn't strong support from leadership, this will never happen. Leadership has got to be one of the champions in any group that's doing this. We need interactive, collaborative training to make the adaptations needed. We need content that's compatible with the way that the people in the agencies and the families and the leaders think. We need trainee availability. People are going to be learning, these are touching up their techniques, need time to do it and time to practice. And they need help with their caseload so that they have the time. That's a trade-off that's got to be managed at levels above them. We need multiple teams. You know, I think we tend to think about teams maybe as the supervisor and the supervisor, the leader, the supervisor, and then the staff who are the on-site staff or the hands-on staff. And I think about that as a vertical team. But we also need horizontal teams. We need the people who are learning, gathering as learners to talk together, to share their videos, to talk about their questions, and to be practice with each other where they're not embarrassed about showing this tape that's so much of a mess. I don't want my supervisor to see this. Help me, help me. And we had some of our best support in the low income project I'll tell you about, were these peer support groups who formed themselves by themselves from these Zoom groups. It's like, we're going to get together and we're going to figure out what she really meant or how we're going to do this. And so that when we get all together, I've already had somebody look at my tapes, you know, peer learning and peer supervision is a powerful, powerful tool. And when you have a group of smart learners coming from different disciplines or different styles, all getting the same training, everybody's getting expertise in the part of it they already knew the best. And so they can share that among peers and build the comprehensive models inside that group of people without needing all this support from people above them. The third team, sorry, I think there are 3 teams. The third team is the team wrapped around the child. It's the child and the parent, the team lead in a generalist model, the people around that child, the interdisciplinary team, the leadership of the agency, and any other people in other agencies who are working with that child. Like that beautiful app that Elizabeth Hasrick, she's there, showed me yesterday. She has an app called Drexel that connects people around these kinds of resources. Who's doing this? Who's doing recreation with this child? In what settings? Well, let's talk about it. And she's got this all set up on apps so that you could be communicating even across from school to Part C or private program to Part C or like Venus David, where are you, Venus? Like Venus David's preschool to the public preschool. People could be talking about this language objective. She'd be saying, he just put his first sentence together today, and here it is. So that the other people who are working could also know right away, he's on this step. We need to be focused there too. So there's this interconnection of all the people who are working around this child, but working in isolation, which works against every child and every parent. Okay, and we need champions. Venus is a champion. It doesn't matter what role the partners play. We need people who are like, yes, we can do this. Yes, we want this. We need parents especially saying this. Yes, we can do this. How can I help? How can I help the other parents? What can we do to make this happen in my child's classroom? Because I want this for him. And I'll do anything. So we've got to have champions. They're the community partners that we need. So I'm doing okay for time, right? It's 4:46. Yeah, okay. So we've been talking about all these changes to be made, right? And how do most of us respond to change? Don't tell me I have to do something differently when I've been practicing for 4 years to do it this way. Oh my Lord, we just went through this with the ESDM group. We want to change the way we're scoring fidelity, just a little bit. You can't imagine the resistance among the highest level of folks. Even when we have the data that demonstrate it's a better system, it's fast to do, it's easy, there's no problem here. It's just better science, better practice, and easier coding. I mean, I spent 3 months talking with this group before they would implement this small change. People don't like change. A few people in any group love change. I love change. I love to make things better. I do it all the time. I'm always looking for ways to improve things. And my staff, we'd sit down in August for our annual, what can we improve this year? I remember what a speech pathologist said to me once, Sally, do we really have to improve every year? Like, yeah, we do. We absolutely do, because I love that kind of thing. But a lot of people don't. So when we're bringing in change, we need to be ready for helping people who respond to change in all kinds of different ways. And often it's the people who got the most expertise who are the most resistant to change. This idea of beginner's mind is an open mind. This is a Buddhist saying from Thich Nhat Hanh, I believe. No, it's not Thich Nhat Hanh. I forget who wrote it. An expert mind has little room to grow. A beginner's mind has infinite room to grow. So we need to think about carefully how we're going to motivate people to change. And fortunately, there is wonderful science in this area from cognitive behavioral science in the area of motivational interviewing. Motivational interviewing was first developed in the areas of helping people with substance abuse problems who frequently begin treatment and then relapse and leave treatment. And I think there is probably not a person in the room who has not tried on your own a behavior change approach. For me, it has most to do with diet and exercise, also cleaning up the kitchen. And you set your intention and you set your chart and you start out. And how many people have carried a plan out from beginning to end, never relapsed, did it once, and you've maintained it forever? How many people have started a plan and relapsed 1 to 50 times? Yeah, okay. So this is what we're talking about. One of the things we need to remember is that relapse is a normal part of change. We have this sense that it means failure, and we've really got to change that. We've got to start from the very beginning with parents we're working with. Of course, this is going to be new, and of course, it's going to be different. And I know there are going to be times it's not going to feel feasible, and that's fine. We just keep doing what we can do. At the time, we do the best we can do, and we fall off the wagon, we get right back on as soon as we can. So anyway, motivational interviewing has a lot of very helpful tools, and the style is of kind of Rogerian kind of listening and making sure you're behind the person and that the client-centered, the client is moving you forward. And that if you don't use those skills already, it's a wonderful way to learn them. But many of us do use the skills, And what I found so useful was this work by Prochaska and Clementi in 1983, where they talked about the cycle of change. And they used their decades of working with addiction to get a sense of what are the steps people go through. And all of us interventionists in our zeal, we think, oh, well, you've got a child with autism, I've got a method, let's get together and let's get going because we can help your child so much. I'll help you help your child so much. And like, nobody comes to you as ready for that. That's like 4 steps down the road. People tend to start thinking when they get a first idea. I know this is hard to read, and I wish I could find a better beginning for this, but I'm going to kind of point to this and say, so people begin with being happy the way things are. There we go. In many of the preschools, people be happy with the way things are. No need to change. Everything's fine here. All right. So a discrepancy needs to occur to get people to start thinking about change. And I laid out a lot of discrepancies for you today that you can use, that we know that more things can happen in everyday preschools, even at the level of a few hours a week. Children can do much better than they're doing in everyday preschools. There's got to be a hook, and there's got to be somebody like the champions who will start to put out there the discrepancy that's going to open the idea, well, I don't know, maybe we could do a little bit of that. Let me think about it. Okay. So there's this first stage of change, is thinking about change. Let me think about it. What would it take? Do we have the capacity, et cetera, et cetera? So you start by getting people to think about change. Now, typically when we meet families with a child with autism, one parent is more ready to go than the other, right? And so often you've got one parent who's at your door and they've gotten a diagnosis and it's like, well, tell me what to do. I'm ready. And the other parent is saying, you know, there's nothing really wrong. I don't buy this autism stuff. You know, yeah, she's just a little delayed in language, but we don't need all this. You know, she's going to catch up. I was slow to talk. I caught up. So there's unwilling to change and ready to change right there. And so in those situations, you're working with 2 different people who are on 2 different routes to the same place. And you've got to be very careful to honor each one. So we're listening to what they're saying. Oh, so you're thinking a little bit of this might be useful? I don't know. What makes you think that? And they tell you that. It's like, oh, okay, well, I see what you're thinking. You're always a little bit behind. Okay, so I'm with you. I hear what you're thinking about. Is there a way I can help? So then they're thinking about it. They're doing some research, and they're starting to make the decision to change. Yeah, I want to adapt some of these HQI procedures. Let me think about what that would be. And often we think about, when we hear them saying that, we think they're ready for action, and they are not ready for action. They are thinking about it. They're making a decision. And there's a lot of stuff that has to get in their head. They gotta, if you're talking about early intervention, they gotta think about, what materials do I need? What about the space? You know, there's a lot of space things here. Writing objectives differently. How do we do that? When do we do that? How do we get everybody on the same page? Wavelength. You know, how do we do this with families? I need to understand. So then there's a lot of, okay, let's just start one little part at a time. You know, what's step 1? Draw the ladder. Step 1, we don't have to do all this at once. Let's get one thing in place and let's make a little bit of change. So they start to get, okay, well, I'm with you. Let's try that. Let's try getting everybody doing the same objectives or something like that. So then they're like starting to take action. And now you're in a great place, because now we can use the adult learning skills that we have to teach adults. They're ready. They want to learn. We provide the supports. We do all the things that adult learners need. We're taking their goals on. We're listening to them. We're getting our cues from them. We're asking them how they want us to learn. How can I be helpful to you? Instead of coming and saying, do this, do this, do this, do this. We're using all good adult learning strategies, and things move along for a while. And then something happens like Christmas vacation or COVID, and everything stops and everything relapses and we're back to the beginning. Or for a parent, a vacation, a holiday, the screaming is back, the sleep is messed up. I'm back to square one. It's like, okay, we're back with square one. But you know what? We know we responded before. We know we'll respond again. You did it before. There's got to be a way you can do it again. Tell me when you're ready. I'm happy when you're ready. And then next week, sleep is horrible. I'm ready. Come back. Let's do sleep. And so then we're starting back here again. Okay, what do you want to do this time? And we're back on this cycle. And we just stay there. We just listen and follow people along, just like we do for ourselves. When we fall off our programs and we make a little tweak, or we get a trainer for a while, or we consult a dietitian, or we say to hell with the scale and throw it away. And then we go buy another one and start up again. You know, we just take people where we are and we help them move as they want to. But there are tremendous tools in this science for us, both for working with parents and for working with groups of people, schools, systems. And Elizabeth's work in system and network communication, she's, I think, a godsend to this kind of work. I wish I could work with Elizabeth too. So we need to think about this, and we need to be very careful about not getting ahead of people and letting the discrepancies do their magic. Because when they look at a video like I'm showing you, 4 weeks from coach to parent to other parent to little boy, he's talking, he's now got 50 words, he's initiating all kinds of play. Like, what kind of magic is that? It's not, it's good teaching. It's just good teaching. And when people see those kinds of things and see the videos, it's like, I want to do that. Those will move them. All right. So is it possible to get these into communities? It is, and there are 2 recent papers that have mapped very different ways to do it. Pat Miranda has just finished a community implementation science study that she carried out in British Columbia. She talked to every agency director in the entire province of early intervention, 30 directors face to face, and 50% of them signed on to do this project. Half of all the agencies in this province, even in the indigenous communities, she had sign on. She enrolled over 50% of the agencies, distributed 4,000 flyers, trained people in all 16 of those agencies to recruit, screen, and assess, because the community had to do all the assessment. They had to learn all the tools. And then she used a complex training procedure to train their folks to carry out a version of the ESDM that they called PACE. They included indigenous cultures, and they did this in response to the fact that in British Columbia, the wait time for an assessment is 70 weeks. If your 2-year-old is finally the pediatrician saying, go get an assessment, your child will have left early intervention before the diagnosis even happens. And it's going to be another year till they get to early intervention. We can't do this. We're losing the best years for language and learning of a child's intervention through bureaucracy. We've got to get these tools into communities so they don't have to wait for clinics and appointments and the medical system to get in there. It doesn't take an interdisciplinary health science center team to understand autism risk at a community level and start an intervention for the signs and symptoms that a child has. That's what early intervention is all about. We treat to the child's needs. We don't treat to diagnosis. We don't intervene for diagnosis. We intervene for developmental needs. That doesn't take a diagnosis. So this was a massive project with 50 children enrolled and randomized by agency into treatment as usual or intervention as usual or their version of ESDM. Children were enrolled for 24 weeks. They got parent coaching from teams that were trained in a pretty traditional ESDM way, which took a long time as an expensive way to do this. But she wanted to do this way. And they combined, let me see, where are we? Okay. They used online materials. They had face-to-face meetings in the beginning with every single person. They had coaches all over and were going to all these sites. They used a combination of a didactic and hands-on skills, doing a live 3-day workshop, one-to-one hands-on practice in an advanced workshop, then supervised practice with children. Then they taught them parent coaching. They did 16 to 20 weeks of parent coaching supervision and continued to supervise post-training for an extended period of time, intermittently as needed. So it was a really massive training effort, and they have very nice outcomes. They found significant group differences in the parent's self-assessment of the parent learning, their quality of life, and their satisfaction with the intervention that they got, with the parents getting PACE, feeling they'd learned far more from their intervention, their quality of life for the family and themselves was greatly enhanced, and they were very satisfied compared to the people who are getting their ongoing community service. They also found a significant difference in the children in, guess what? The number of words understood, which is the best predictor of speech development that there is for toddlers. So in their most important outcomes, they found the results that they wanted. And they found that the parent change, so parent learning, predicted the amount of change that the children would make, which is exactly what the parent coaching model is all about. The coach teaches the parent teaches the child, and it's this indirect route of intervention into the child. But if you think about the degrees of freedom in that flow through, it's amazing that parents can get to fidelity and that children can show the response, given how little training the parents are getting compared to what our staff get. But it happens, and we've demonstrated in our lab. I think you demonstrated that in your situation. Parent fidelity leads to child gain in a parent implemented program. Staff fidelity leads to child gain in a staffed program. So that's one model, and it's impressive in the size of it. The second model I want to share with you is the one that a paper we just published, Aubin Stamer and I, which was looking at parent implemented intervention of ESDM in low resource regions in the States. And this was a randomized controlled feasibility study. We chose 4 areas of the country. We piloted in Philadelphia, and there's Philadelphia. And then we continued after the pilot year to work in Alabama, the southern area of Alabama. We worked in the plains of Colorado, which is a ranching, farming kind of area. And we worked in the agricultural area of California along the, whatever that's called. I live right there and I can't even think about it. Anyway, along that rich farming area. And in this project, we recruited in 4 states. We went to all low-income areas in which the mean income of the region was below 50% of the mean of the state. And the families that we worked with all had incomes that were less than 50% of the county in which they lived. We enrolled 13 agencies, and we randomized by agency not within states, I think across states. We enrolled 35 coaches and 34 children, and the experimental group received 24 hours of training. But this was an extremely cheap and stripped down model in which we basically averaged only 30 minutes of training per interventionist in this project a week. It was like $15 is what it cost for a trainer to train a staff person a week in this project. Our outcomes were we also found significant differences in the experimental group in terms of the coach's fidelity of implementation and the parent fidelity of implementation. We did not find effects on the children, and partly we lacked power to do that. Partly the timeline, you don't want to gather child outcome data at the same point the parents are just getting to fidelity, because the kids haven't gotten the full intervention yet. So when you plan these, make sure to take at least 6 to 12 months after the parents get to fidelity, or the staff does, before you gather your outcome data. We just didn't have enough time to do that, and we have another grant out to try to figure that one out. As I said, it took 30 minutes of trainer time a week to bring both the parents and the coaches to fidelity. And we worked only in groups, only online. We never traveled. And we provided everything that was needed to the sites so that it didn't matter about the income of the sites. So in wrapping up, critical resources for this kind of work, the work you're going to do, distance learning procedures, both synchronous and asynchronous learning processes built on adult learning models, and university community partnerships, which you are in a very rich situation to do. And I'm going to skip over that slide and to come to the next generation of autistic adults, who are the children who are in early intervention now. What can we do for them to make their adult outcomes richer and more satisfying for them and happier? We can be delivering higher quality intervention now, using our existing resources, personnel, and material in different ways. Who delivers this? Everybody. Family, EI people, preschool people, community activities, the gymnastics people, the daycare center, the Sunday school people, anywhere a child is, we can infuse the adults around them with simple little skills that will help that child learn so much more in that situation. How do we get the tools to everyone? We find and use the best that we have, and we disseminate everything, put everything online, publish everything, put it online, give it away. There's so much material out there. And support everybody where they are, to just start right there. Step one, baseline, just the next little step is all they have to go. Who's responsible for this? We all are. This is what we do. We care about the children. We care about the families. We need to do this for the future. And what about the people who are adults right now? What about them? The same things apply. The leadership in the situations where they are, the evidence-based practices that exist for the needs that they have in terms of autonomy and relationships and meaning in their activities. We can work on implementing at fidelity practices that we use. And we can build and continue this idea of learning for life. We're talking about the new data on dementia in adults with autism. And I keep wondering how much of that is due to the lack of learning opportunities that they have as soon as they leave school. That so many of their lives are so empty of anything new, of anything that requires any learning to do. I mean, we all know, I'm a senior citizen. I know learning is key to keeping my brain from drying up and going away. It's true for all adults. And the life of too many adults with autism is monotonous. It lacks stimulation. It's incredibly boring and incredibly lonely. We can take what we know right now, and we can take all these same ideas and infuse them into the living communities where adults are, who are living lives that are in need of more support. What is our overriding goal? It's quality of life. And when I think about quality of life, my definition is relationships, people we care about and people who care about us. Good health. Health is so diminished in autism. And we all know you just don't want to do when you're feeling bad. Health is intimately linked to mental health, to all the activities we're talking about, and to all the engagement we're talking about. Work, meaningful work. Work isn't the same as recreation. Work is a productive activity, and everybody needs work. Goodness, with our 2-year-olds with autism, we teach them to do chores. It's the initial set of programs. We all have tasks to do in our lives, and tasks give meaning and structure and rhythm to our lives. And that is very helpful for everyone. This is play, and it's especially play outside, recreation. Whole different set of learning skills when we're talking about recreation. And we're not talking about one recreation activity. How many do you all engage in? How many of the people that you know who are retired engage in? We need many recreational activities: music, theater, movies, cards, board games, restaurants, social groups, you name it. Whatever people are interested in doing, let's just go experience them and figure out what takes. We need recreation for the weekends and the evenings, so that it isn't just TV and computer, and recreation is a social activity. And finally, this is learning. We need adult learning activities for all of the adults, just like we all are engaged in learning activities and love it. This is going to be very helpful for their kind of brain health, mental health, and just activation around new learning. It's exciting to learn new things and to master new things. And so we need to use the existing money, use the existing people, and use the science-based knowledge that we have to improve or to support quality of life for all autistic people who need support across the entire lifespan. And that's the public health mission. And that's the mission of all of us in this room and working in this field. And I so appreciate the chance to talk with you and learn from you all today about this important work. Thank you.